I'm Dr. Eubanks, and today we are going to talk about writing as a process. When people think about writing, they often imagine it as the act of putting words down on paper with a pencil or pen, or typing them into a phone or a word processing app on a computer. But that's really only a very small part of the process. And writing actually mostly involves a variety of interworking mental activities, and therefore it might be described as a complex cognitive process that produces a verbal text. Let's take a real simple example. Take the example of writing a grocery list. Composing a grocery list might involve the following types of mental activities. Before you ever put pencil to paper or pen to paper or type the list into your phone or however it is you're going to record the actual list, before you do that, you've probably gone through all of these mental activities. For example, taking stock of what you already have. You may not even need to look in your cabinets. You may just know that you need milk because you drank the rest of the milk yesterday, or you're out of sugar, or you need some salt or pepper or butter or whatever. You might already know what you have, or you might go and actually look in your cupboard or in your refrigerator to see what you have. And also, you know what you like to eat. You know the types of things you can cook. You know if you're going to cook something new and try something you haven't tried cooking before. You know what kind of snacks you like. So all of that information is stored in your brain, and your brain processes all of it when you're deciding what to put down in a grocery list. And then if you're planning your meals, then you have to identify what you need for those meals and what ingredients you need. And this is, again, going to have to be determined in relation to what you know you already have at home and don't therefore need to go buy. You may be working with a budget, so you probably also know what you're likely to find at the grocery store that you shop at all the time. So if someone says, get me some green caviar and 3 rabbits, well, you'll know whether you're likely to find that at your favorite grocery store or not. Your brain processes all of that in an instant, just in order to put down the words on that grocery list. And then the final step is actually expressing the list verbally. In other words, putting it in writing in the traditional sense of the word writing. So that's when you actually take the words that reference whatever medium you're going to use to make the list. So we can see that the writing process is a complex set of mental activities, and that's where most of the actual work is done in writing. And we just looked at the example of a very simple genre of the grocery list. If you're writing a research paper for your class, or if you're writing a report or a lab report or anything like that, it's a much more complicated genre, and so there's going to be a much more complicated, complex process in order to produce that level of text. Typically, the stages that researchers identify and teachers of writing identify as the stages in the writing process are pre-writing, drafting and revision, proofreading, submitting the text to an editor or to a teacher, and then making the text public. In other words, making its final version available to its intended audience. When we talk about pre-writing, we often think of things like brainstorming, mind mapping, diagramming, pre-writing, outlining, or reverse outlining. Those are all very widely used forms of what we call pre-writing. But let's not let the term pre-writing mislead us. By implication, pre-writing should refer to things that are done before one begins to write, but that's not actually the case. What we call pre-writing is done at any point during the writing process. It could be done before you ever make a draft, or it could be done after you've worked on several drafts, right? Sometimes mind mapping can help at any stage, or Brainstorming can help at any stage. If you get stuck somewhere, you get writer's block, you might brainstorm, or you might mind map to see how all your ideas are connected and things like that. So just because it's called pre-writing doesn't mean it refers to activities that have to happen only at the beginning. They can happen at any time. What that shows us is that the writing process is not usually strictly chronological, and it can be recursive, it can be repetitive, and there can be any number of different mental activities going on in your mind at the same time. So let's take, for example, a research paper. Let's say that you have to do a research paper or some sort of lengthy writing assignment. And so what you do is you sit down and you write an outline, and that outline creates a structure, and you already know what's going to go in each portion of the outline. So you might have your introduction, and then your literature review, your methods, and within each one of those sections, you might actually write an outline for each section as well. Before you can really accomplish that, though, you must have done a lot of the research. You must know what's going to actually end up having to go into those sections in order to identify all that information in the outline, so that the outline shows you how your research paper is going to be structured. And let's say that you're writing the discussion section of the research paper, and you get kind of stuck and you don't know where to go because you're dealing with a lot of complex ideas. So this might be late in your writing process, but that might be exactly the time when it's good to do a mind mapping exercise. And in mind mapping, what you would do is you would take and draw out visually some sort of scheme that shows how all of the different main ideas in your text are connected to one another. Some people would do that by putting sticky notes on the board and pinning threads between them. You can do it on your computer, you can do it on a piece of paper. It's typically, you put ideas in the sort of arrangement that show how they're related to each other, and then you draw connecting lines between them, and that can help you figure out how to frame your discussion of your research results for your research paper. It can help you figure out how all of the ideas in your paper go together. The next stage of the writing process that's typically identified is drafting and revision. Drafting is the act of creating text. So you've done all this research, you've read all kinds of books and articles and texts, you've thought a lot about your topic, and now you know what it is you want to say, and so that's when you finally start putting words into your computer. That's when you start your drafting, okay? And then once you've made a first draft, you will want to revise it. Revision refers to substantially developing the text beyond what it was before. That could mean expanding it significantly. It could mean making it much shorter, cutting a lot of material. It could mean moving lots of material around. But it typically refers to substantial changes to one of your drafts. You can go through any number of revisions before you're done with a writing project. Now, when you're revising, you may introduce minor errors back into the text. So let's say you increase this length of your text by 50%. All of that new material could potentially have the same types of errors that come into every first draft. Spelling errors, punctuation errors, grammatical errors, typographical errors, those types of things. It's usually better not to worry too much about those, because every time you do a substantial revision, you could introduce new errors. So it's better to save the task of fixing all those errors for the very end of the writing process, and that is what we call proofreading. So once you've planned your text and you've done all your research and you've drafted your text and you've revised your text and then drafted it again and then revised it again, whatever number of times you needed to, then you see that your text is in a more or less solid state and it's not going to be changing substantially anymore. That's when it's time for proofreading, which is when you go through and you look for all your spelling errors, your grammatical errors, your typographical errors, mechanical errors, and things like that. What we've seen here today is that the writing process is recursive, could be repetitive. It's very dynamic. Any number of activities can be going on in your mind at the same exact time while you're doing all this mental work that it takes to generate a text. And the process may seem endless. Now, if we return to the example of the grocery list and compare it to the example of the research paper, we'll see that not only is everything we just discussed apparent, but that the process can vary significantly from one genre to the next. The mental activities you need to make a grocery list just aren't the same as the mental activities you need to make a research paper. Not only that, some people might find certain types of activities more useful than others. Not everyone may find mind mapping or outlining useful. Other people may not want to ever begin drafting without an outline or without a mind map. Reverse outlining that can help fix structural problems. That's taking a draft and transforming it into an outline that reflects the structure of that draft. We call that reverse outlining. Not everyone does that. Some people don't find it very helpful. So the writing process will be somewhat dependent on the genre in which you're writing, but it could also just be dependent on what works best for you. And the best thing to do is determine your own workflow, determine your own methods for planning, drafting, revising, and proofreading your work. As we conclude, I'd like to ask you to think about different things that you could do to practice the writing process. Try doing free writing. Give yourself timed sessions where for a certain amount of time, you just produce words about a certain topic without stopping. No matter what comes out, you just let it out and then you see what you have. That can help with drafting. Try organizing some brainstorming sessions with your fellow students. Try mind mapping some of the texts that you read, and then you'll get good at mind mapping, and you can use mind mapping on your own drafts. Anyways, those are some tips, and that's a brief overview of the writing process. I hope you have found this to be informative and helpful, and I'll see you next time.